Greetings, finders of both paths and stars. Nice to see you wander in for another episode of Drift Lanes to Distant Worlds. Today's subject is definitely one of the weirder ones, based entirely around its interesting orbital phenomena. A brief piece of trivia for you as we start. Did you know that between the years of 1979 and 1999, Pluto was closer to the Sun than Neptune? This is also back when we classed it as a planet. Pluto has a very eccentric orbit, and part of that takes it past the farthest gas giant and slightly closer to our Sun, just for a small period of time. Since that orbit takes 247 years, no one alive today will see this particular set of circumstances again, but I was alive during that period, so I think it's super neat. But what does this have to do with Triaxus, the planet we're covering today? Well, Triaxus experiences the same situation, but on a much different scale. At the farthest point of its orbit, where we've placed it now, Triaxus sits beyond Eox, far away from the Sun, a frozen ball of ice. However, as generations pass, it slowly spins closer to the Sun, to the point of being the second planet there, between Absalom and Castrovel. Then, over even more generations, the world slides back away, getting colder and colder until the harsh winter sets in again. It's a little funny that while Triaxus has an incredibly weird orbit, a lot of other things about the planet are very stable. It's roughly the same size as Galarian, giving it Earth-like conditions, and no horrible cataclysm has ruined the atmosphere, so while the temperature does fluctuate based on the orbital position, it's much more regulated than a planet like Abalon or Akaton or Eox. This is why Triaxus has survivable winters and summer seasons, even if the differences are extreme. This stability even extends to its orbital speed, which, if what little I know about orbital mechanics is correct, should actually change as it approaches and leaves the Sun. After all, this orbit is very similar to a gravitational slingshot, where an object is basically made to go around a large gravitational body like a sun or a planet, and use the change in speed as it gets close to slingshot it far away. It's like that conservation of momentum thing you get when people spin around in figure skating and bring their arms in together to get faster or slower. But Triaxus does not do that. Its speed stays consistent no matter the position. I guess it's just built different. Also, a note, while I will be discussing as much about Triaxus in both seasons as possible, we have a lot more information about wintertime than we do about summer. This is because that's the season we see when both the Pathfinder and Starfinder timelines start, and the season is so long, we're likely not going to get a summertime look anytime soon, at least for Pathfinder. Starfinder, we'll see about that. I mean, I guess if Pathfinder is still publishing in 100 years, we can check on summer Triaxus. Look forward to that video in the summer of 2125, I guess. That all cleared up, let's sync up the orbit with Distant Worlds of the Past, Triaxus, the Wanderer. In contrast to our last two videos, Triaxus is a living world, with a whole functioning ecosystem. Everything on the planet is specialized to work with the long seasons that it undergoes. In terms of wildlife, Triaxus is practically a different world between summer and winter. During the summer years, the planet blooms, with vast forests and dense jungles glowing rapidly from the incredible deluge of water that comes with the melting ice. Animals fill these places just as quickly, feeding off the abundant plant life. Many of these summer species will spend their life cycle preparing for a long winter hibernation, or else undergo a seasonal metamorphosis. You know how stoats will dramatically change their fur between winter and summer? Well, a lot of animals on Triaxus do the same thing, but on a generational basis. Keep that in mind. But as several mostly dead guys once said, winter is coming. Inevitably, the seasons will change, food will become more scarce, the glaciers of the poles will start to creep forward day by day, and the sea will freeze into massive land bridges. Smaller plants will live under the snow, while mushrooms and lichens grow slowly off the dead matter from the relatively short autumn. Giant furred insects and massive predatory snowbirds hunt the frozen plains, and life becomes much harder. But it's still survivable, and living through it are all the major cultures of Triaxus. The main humanoid species of Triaxus are the Triaxians, whose appearance changes quite a bit depending on the season. On the surface, they look a lot like humans with a few features similar to elves, most specifically the ears. However, everything else depends on when you were born. Triaxians born during the summer have darker skin, rounder eyes, and much less hair, to better withstand the greater heat of the season. During the winter, they instead grow a layer of fur all across their bodies, gain lighter skin due to the much weaker sunlight of the faraway star, and have narrower eyes to prevent snow blindness. Most interestingly are the Triaxians born in the much briefer periods of spring and autumn. Called transitionals, these Triaxians are born with a mix of both characteristics, gaining or losing hair to accommodate the coming seasons and slowly shifting generationally. This aspect of their biology is not just a response to the planet's nature, but almost like an inherent part of their species as a whole. A Triaxian family that migrated to Castrovel as their planet moved past would, over generations, still shift into the winterborn form. They wouldn't just stay in the more suitable summerborn form the entire time. The transitional forms are as much a prediction of their planet's path as a response to it. That's very weird and not normally how biology works, but Triaxus cares not for your scientific facts. There are 2 other sentient species that call Triaxus home, and they are somewhat related. Ruling over about half the planet are a small but powerful population of dragons, who compete for territory and control of the smaller humanoid populations that live with them. Below these true dragons are the dragonkin. Smaller than dragons, but much taller than most humanoids, the dragonkin are probably closer to humanoids in terms of behavior and culture. Though they have the same limb structure that dragons do, 2 forelimbs, 2 hind legs, and a pair of wings, dragonkin walk upright rather than on all fours, using their tails to keep balance. Unlike the humanoid Triaxians, the dragons and their dragonkin don't shift between the seasons. The dragonkin can endure both environments just fine as they are, and so can the dragons, though their long lifespans and slow birth rates means that having children that shifted with the seasons would be unworkable anyway. The origins of the dragonkin are interesting and kind of tragic in a way. Many of the great dragons that lived on Triaxus were fond of the smaller humanoids who lived alongside them, and they wished to better connect with the Triaxians. However, dragons are large, scary, and live for centuries, while the average lifespan of a Triaxian was about 80 years. This brought some dragons great sorrow, and they sought a way to bridge the gap between themselves and the shorter-lived mortals. Eventually, a ritual was found that would allow a pair to have children. This is how the first dragonkin were created. Upon seeing their children connect more easily with the Triaxians, because dragonkin are smaller and live shorter lives, the dragons retreated away from civilization, so as not to be hurt by the passing of their loved ones as the years slipped away. While this was an act born of love, it had a small knock-on effect. Those dragons who placed value on the other species of their planet secluded themselves, leaving the world open to the oppression of their less scrupulous kin. But while the dragons would rule, the dragonkin would take on a different role. Something about their creation allowed the dragonkin to form a powerful bond with others. These bonds can be with anyone, but are rarely made between dragonkin, instead bonding a dragonkin with another ancestry. Usually that's a Triaxian, but that's mostly an issue of availability. Should a dragonkin encounter another ancestry, they could bond with them the same way. This bond is not something that can be invoked accidentally or forced on someone. It requires a lengthy ritual between both parties and lasts until one of them dies. A bonded pair can communicate telepathically and react together as one. Since dragonkin can also fly, you can probably see where this is going. That's right, werefolk, we've got bonded dragon riders. So where might they be dragon riding to? Well, if you go by the most traditional definition, Triaxus only has 2 continents, but in more practical terms it has 3, with a land bridge connecting the 2 larger ones. Neither continent is controlled by a single major power, but instead by a collection of powers vaguely unified together. The eastern continent is under the control of the Allied Territories, a group of nations that are united for exactly one purpose, not being individually picked off by their counterpart from the western continent. Otherwise, the various nations that make up the Allied Territories squabble and fight fiercely among each other. The form these fights take depends on the season, as that will affect how people live their lives. In winter, it's more like a siege warfare situation, while summertime battles are kind of like hit-and-run raids, since people are much more spread out. Countries will split and merge for a variety of reasons, but none of them grow too powerful lest they force all the other territories to team up against them. There are dozens of these territories, but we only really know about 4 of them. Camorra is a southern territory bordering the sea, and during the steamy summer, the people there are plagued by vampiric creatures that emerge from the southern jungles. To their east is Prieta, the Scholar's Paradise, home to the greatest libraries and universities on Triaxus. Back up north, Alok sits on the open plains and is known for their extensive cavalry training. And lastly we have Zo. Hey, that sounds familiar, and not important. Anyway, Zo is the port of 1,000 ships, accepting people from all across the planet. While we're over here, let's head down south to look at a community that isn't actually part of the Allied Territories, the Sephorian Archipelago. So, fun fact about Triaxus, it does not have a moon. That means there are no tides. The waters of their ocean still move a little from currents, weather, and more importantly, the melting and refreezing of glaciers during the long winters, but otherwise the sea is very calm. The people who live here travel between a number of islands throughout their lives, either by a small boat during the summer or through long caravan hikes across the ice in the winter. There are quite a few mysteries about their habits and which islands they visit or don't, with a number being avoided for unspoken reasons. Also unspoken is anything to do with the strange towers that spew clouds of smoke into the sky. No one from the islands will live in them, even during the harsh winters, and they won't breathe a word to anyone outside about why. But back to the main continent, who are the Allied Territories actually fighting against? The answer is the dragon-ruled city-states of the Drakelands. While the nations of the Allied Territories have various different kinds of government, each city-state of the Drakelands is an autocracy. At their head is a powerful dragon, who rules the smaller Triaxians and dragonkin under them with an iron fist. Now, you might think, with each city being ruled by a long-lived powerful dragon, the city-states of the Drakelands would be a lot more stable. However, there are a few factors to consider here. Firstly, while dragons don't need to shift drastically to survive the environment like the rest of Triaxian wildlife, they are susceptible to changes in the seasons. Horned dragons that hunt through verdant forests aren't exactly in the best circumstances trapped out on a frozen tundra, while something like a burning cinder dragon is a double-edged sword in the cold. Meanwhile, dragons better suited to the frigid environments will find their territory melting out from under them as the summer comes around. The second thing to consider is the temperamentality of dragons. They tend to be very proud creatures, doubly so for Triaxus, where ruling largely uncontested gives them a very high opinion of themselves. Which means a war can start between two powers simply because one dragon thinks the other's taste in lairs is cringe. Which means the cycle of seasons is also a cycle of dragons whose power is more dominant in one season, seeking out their rivals as soon as the weather begins to turn in order to enact revenge for slights against their honor. And round and round and round it goes, and where it stops, we never know. The dragons would love to expand into the allied territories, but doing so is difficult. None of the city rulers are invincible, and dragons already have a slow reproductive cycle. Add on to it the fact that any children will eventually just become rivals for power keeps the number of dragons relatively low compared to other species. And as we just covered, cooperating between dragon cities is nearly impossible. Egos would get in the way. So the dragons need their armies of dragonkin and humanoids to help with the assaults, and those armies need to actually get to the allied territories. Sailing the thawed sea or marching across the frozen expanse would require a lot more resources than just marching there over land. So the best possible route is the southern land bridge. But to use it, they have to go through the Skyfire Mandate. Originally founded by a coalition between the Triaxian humanoids and the dragons who helped create the Dragonkin, the Skyfire Mandate now stands as a defense between the allied territories and the aggressive leaders of the Drakelands. The Dragon Legion lives in Fortress Ares located along the Parapet Mountains, a range that runs north to south along most of the area between the Drakelands and the Skyfire Mandate. What little isn't protected by mountains is guarded by the Drake Wall, an ancient structure that stretches across the open plains to the south of the mountain range. Now, the Skyfire Mandate doesn't have a unified government, just a collection of holdings maintained by the Dragon Legion that loosely work together. Group decisions are made by a tribunal of the 13 most decorated leaders from each holding if necessary, but those are rare. Commanders have absolute authority, and most disputes between commanders are settled by parley with a neutral third party to help things settle. Since the western border is what the Mandate shares with the Drakelands, that's where most of the action is concentrated. The farther east you go, the more the land transitions into farming villages and plains full of herd animals. The people who live in these small settlements make up most of the Legion's recruits, and many children dream about soaring on the back of their bonded Dragonkin companion. Many of them grow up into adults that are more likely to grumble about the tithe the Legion demands to keep them safe, though anyone that has lived through an assault from the Drakelands is pretty quick to pay up. Now, anybody can sign up to join the Dragon Legion, though not everyone will become a Dragon Rider. Dragonkin are fewer in number than Triaxians, and bonding represents a significant risk, since if either bonded partner dies, the other one experiences a deep emotional backlash. It isn't guaranteed to kill them, but it is quite devastating, and forming a second bond afterwards is much rarer, as it's difficult to find somebody who's drift compatible. So the Dragonkin only bond the best they can find. Dragonkin physiology is quite different from true dragons, more bipedal and with hands closer to a humanoid than a reptile's claws. This allows the Dragonkin to more easily wield weapons, and their greater size and strength makes them fearsome melee combatants. So most will pick a partner that can act as ranged or magical support from their back, forming a quite formidable pair, though 2 melee warriors are not uncommon either. Anyone who isn't chosen instead serves as the regular ground forces, which form the backbone of the Legion. Many stay on because the hope of a bond eventually forming is always there, though just as many will wash out and return home as reserves to be called up when needed. Separated from this conflict by an ocean is the immortal suzerainty of Ning. Though somewhat aware of the outside world's issues, Ning prefers to keep to itself and has developed its own very distinct culture. At the head of the entire nation and the empire is the immortal suzerain. They are seen as a living manifestation of the land's will and rule with absolute authority. However, an important distinction must be made here. It is that the title of suzerain is considered immortal, not the person holding it. That person is very much mortal. The role is passed upon death or abdication from the previous suzerain, and whoever holds it gives up everything tying them to their previous life. They are now the title they hold. The continent of Ning is full of powerful and predatory magical beasts, which will attack the outlying rural settlements with ruthless determination. The standing army of Ning works to push them back, and are assisted by structures called shelter stones. Built a little like ziggurats, these fortified buildings almost always have a way of contacting the military. Towns under attack can retreat and call for help, waiting for the protectorate from nearby garrisons or cities to arrive and save them. Socially, the people of Ning are very concerned with status, social custom, and with honor. Proper etiquette is incredibly important, and breaking any kind of social rule, written or unwritten, can have disastrous consequences. Claiming ignorance can get you out of a bad situation, but it will also give a big hit to your reputation. while flaunting convention openly will have disastrous consequences, as the entirety of Ning's society will shun you for failure to uphold the social contract. Since status is everything, one way to gain a great amount of it is becoming a Yukara, which roughly translates to battle flower. A Yukara gives up their previous name and family, instead adopting the life of a martial warrior. Their fights are as much a ritual as they are a battle, with the lithe movements and painted bodies putting on quite the show. Many rise to great prominence with their performance, gaining a status as high as the greatest of noble houses. In fact, a lot of noble houses will take on a Yukara as a consort, with the greater ranking of the Yukara leading more status to their house. Though make no mistake, being a Yukara is not an easy path to power. Those that don't measure up after a year are pressured to retire to the rural villages as defenders of the common people. This is a position the Yukara will fill for life, not because they can't retire, but because they'll never reach an age in which that becomes a concern. After all, it's important for washouts not to stick around too long, you know? And that's Triaxus, a very interesting planet. The extreme season length and the way the wildlife changes to match that is pretty interesting. The Dragonkin provide one of the most consistently cool ideas in fantasy fiction, dragon riding. Seriously, how many kids read Pern or watched How to Train Your Dragon and wished for that? It's just cool, and it's a premise that's stuck around as long as it has for a damn good reason. The only issue I feel is that Triaxus' extremely long orbit makes playing through the seasonal transition difficult, bordering on impossible. Maybe if you wanted to do a campaign where your characters are all dragons gaining power in the Drakelands over centuries, it could work, but otherwise the long seasons are relegated to background world building. You can still do a lot with them, like people failing to believe the ancient tales of summer after they've only lived life in a deep winter. Hell, there's a cult in the Skyfire Mandate that believes winter is a manifestation of people's lack of belief in summer, and if they just reject winter hard enough, it'll go away. Not how that works, but nice try. So there are ideas you can work with there, but it takes some finesse to really thread that needle. But seasons come and seasons go, as Triaxus spins through the solar system in its same old dance. The gap can't stop winter or summer, so let's see what Triaxus is like now that we are far into Driftlanes of the Future, Triaxus the Wanderer. The gap has spat us back out in winter, and gone on long enough for Triaxus to experience at least one entire rotation of seasons, if not more. This means we're in chilly times, but there was some summer in there too for people to enjoy. Triaxus as a planet hasn't really changed so much as it's recontextualized aspects of its life. A small example of this is that the native humanoids are now known as Rhyphorians. After all, Dragonkin come from Triaxus too, so calling them Triaxians also makes sense, right? We've been over this before, but, you know, good to bring it up again. Both species have gained a lot from the technological leaps that have occurred in their jump to Starfinder. Dragonkin now have a plethora of new options available for forming bonds, with many of the new species offering a unique experience for both parties. Instead of just the smaller humanoid Rhyphorians, Dragonkin can bond with creatures closer to their size, those with strange body types, and even things that they never would have considered before, like the shape-shifting alien starfish Astrozoans. As for the Rhyphorians, while their natural births still follow the ever-shifting cycle of seasons, technology allows them to undergo treatments to maintain whichever form they wish. Summerborn, winterborn, and transitional Rhyphorians can now fully mingle with one another instead of being separated by generations. But what about the dragons? Have they changed much over the centuries? Well, yes, but also no. The dragons still control the Drakelands and rule their cities from the top, but it's no longer the top of the government. Because what's worse than an autocratic governmental dictator? A CEO, obviously. All the absolute power, none of the hassle of needing to actually run some kind of government. It's just money and power all the time. The position of CEO also has another advantage over city ruler. You are less bound to the planet you start on. Interstellar business can go anywhere the credits spend, and the dragon CEOs of Triaxus are some of the best at navigating the cutthroat and ruthless world of business. Being a giant lizard capable of literally crushing the competition does lend a lot of negotiation power. Finally, there are several groups that have traveled to Triaxus over the centuries, adding to the population in their own unique way. At some point during the gap, a sizable contingent of elves settled in the northern plains of the Allied territories. Since it happened during the gap, we don't know why they made their decision. This group has integrated with the Rhyphorian community quite well, and unlike many elves after the gap, did not choose to return to Castrovel. The other group of settlers are the many species that were present on Galarian prior to its disappearance. Triaxus is largely consistent with their lost planet in terms of gravity and size, although obviously the weather conditions and seasonal patterns are not the same. Still, for the people seeking to find a new home that is a planet and not a limited space station, Triaxus is one of the better options. Gnomes make up the largest group of people doing this, as evidence has been uncovered that their people actually came to Triaxus centuries ago. Gnomes originated in the first world of the Fae and immigrated en masse to Galarian in the ancient past, and the same seems to be true here. Verifying if it's the exact same time is tricky, but that seems to be the case. What happened to this ancient gnome population is currently unknown. This has, naturally, greatly shifted the political landscape of Triaxus. The Allied territories and the Drakelands are no longer at war with one another. This means the Dragon Legion doesn't need to maintain a strong defense at the border between the two, and the Skyfire Mandate really doesn't need to exist anymore. But it does, because as times change, so too do the people. The Dragon Legion has been renamed the Skyfire Legion, and its dragon-riding pairs have shifted their relationship away from rider and mount, and towards pilot and co-pilot. The Legion still occupies the land bridge between the Allied territories and the Drakelands. The Skyfire Mandate was never a proper country in the past, with each holding functioning independently with a unified goal. The modern Skyfire Legion works much the same way. Individual mercenary groups within the Legion handle their own recruitment, training, equipment, and so on. It's more accurate to say that the Legion functions a bit like a guild, where individual leaders are still required to follow certain basic rules and protocol, as well as contribute towards the function of the Legion as a whole, but are otherwise in charge of their own affairs. This should be a recipe for disaster, but the Skyfire Legion makes it work, partly through strict policing of their members. Actual membership in the Skyfire Legion is something people compete fiercely for, and several groups simply maintain an association with the Skyfire Legion, which is often enough to get your foot in the door for most mercenary jobs. The loose regulations here actually make the Skyfire Mandate a great place for smugglers and criminals to offload unconventionally obtained goods. How many questions you get asked depends on the city or holding you land in, but Cumo is well known as the best option for unloading any stock you find yourself in need of quickly losing track of. The only thing it doesn't deal in is the trafficking of sentient creatures, which is harshly cracked down on. So good on them for that. Now before we talk about the developments in the Allied territories and the Drakelands, let's quickly cover the suzerainty of Ning and the Sephorian Archipelago. Ning remains highly isolated from Triaxus, and from the Pact Worlds, whose authority they do not recognize. The entire island nation is still ruled by the Immortal Suzerain, but their function in society has changed significantly. The immortal part still refers to the position, and the Suzerain still holds almost absolute authority within Ning. However, the society of Ning has changed to one heavily based on mercantile trade, with the Suzerain as the continent's absolute CEO. Now you'd think that would be more of the same problems that plague the Drakelands, but Ning's specific culture seems better able to handle the situation. Status, honor, and obligation remain the cornerstone of Ning's society and help temper the avarice and greed you'd normally find in these kind of situations. The Suzerain is assisted by a Circle of Wisdom, a group of 5 whose members are drawn from the continent's oldest and most trusted non-profit organizations. This allows them to stand above the concerns of profit-motivated businesses, which lets them better advise the Suzerain and protect Ning as a whole. This kind of balancing act can also be found at the local level. Ning is divided up into 14 square-shaped territories called mercantiles. Each mercantile is governed by the 4 most influential business leaders, though this isn't just decided by size. None of the 4 can be part of a competing industry, which incentivizes cooperation and discourages monopolization, as controlling too much of the market effectively forces you out of the highest office. While I'm personally skeptical of this working out long-term, it seems to work for Ning. Moving over to the Sephorian Archipelago, the people here maintain very little contact with the outside world. The only reason they haven't fully rejected the Pact World's authority like Ning has is that it would draw too much attention. Better to keep their head down and let the Pact Worlds continue to believe they are in charge, because the insular community of island villages is hiding something. Each community is home to a hidden secret research facility that works on some aspect of a huge communal project. Once their role is done, the team is given a generous severance package on the condition they sign a magically enforced NDA, locking down all information about what's going on. Only the mysterious board of directors knows the point of all this, and they are not talking. The closest you can get is meeting with your enforcer in the city of Kwa, but I'd recommend against that if you like being, alive. Now that's all ominous and stuff, but if we spent all our time worrying about secret research projects, we'd never get anything done. So let's move on to the 2 large continents. We'll start with the Allied territories, and our first stop is going to be the 2 islands down here, close to the Sephorian Archipelago. Both Maruchia and Nusova initially look like untouched island wilderness, filled with local wildlife and flora, until you adjust your view and look up, which lets you see the massive floating citadel cities where the inhabitants actually live. These floating cities existed originally for a shockingly mundane purpose. The weather patterns of Triaxus resulted in extreme changes to the ocean during the transition between winter and summer, as the freezing and thawing ice caused extreme floods as it raised and lowered sea levels. Normally sea ice melting doesn't affect the levels that much, but long-term freezes affect the density of water, meaning that when it melts it takes up more volume. Fascinating science behind this, but the end result for the islands was incredibly bad flooding that spurred them to start building upwards. And there is nothing more upwards than the sky. Wait, this is a sci-fi game, space is more upward. Whatever. Patrols from the Citadel regularly descend to pick up potential citizens, who undergo rigorous vetting before they are allowed to remain, but once earned, they are citizens of these cities for life. The southern shores of the Allied territories are heavily forested during the summer. with the winter bringing an abundance of moss and lichen that thrives in the harsher environment, growing on top of behemoth skeletons of trees from the previous growing season. The eastern Durashi rainforest is studied year-round for its exceptional biodiversity. The main hub for this is the city of Hinth, which is run by an AI programmed with the digitized consciousness of the city's founders, which helps direct and regulate its systems to study Triaxus weather systems, floral growths, and species evolution. North of the rainforest is Bora Woods, a coniferous forest whose pine-like trees stay green year-round. Recently, something has been harming these trees, causing their needle leaves to turn brown. Weirdly, the trees don't show any sign of disease, appearing perfectly healthy, but the animals of the woods have started acting far more aggressively. But not as aggressive as the species that inhabit the Uchore jungle, which are all vampiric. During the summer, there are dozens of blood-sucking species all competing for a little sippy of the red stuff. But during the winter, the Ranonecks dominate. Looking like giant vampiric bears, these creatures aggressively assault the nearby city of Kimona. The citizens of Kimona are heavily armed and trained to resist attacks by wandering Ranonecks, whose assaults can be deadly even in small numbers. The fact that the beasts have become more aggressive and even possibly coordinated in recent days is a huge cause for alarm. North of Kimona is one of the most insular cities not just on Triaxus, but in the entire Pact Worlds. Alok is much more isolationist than they were pre-Gap, locking the city down entirely and refusing to modernize. Aircraft are forbidden above the city airspace, and any craft that enters is mercilessly shot down. Their crew and pilots either executed or sentenced to life in harsh prison. A very small amount of land trade is permitted, but getting to the city must be done on foot through dangerous terrain, lined with traps and inhabited with aggressive wildlife. The fact that people still take the risk says a lot about the unique magical goods that Alok produces. Nearby is Hosea Forest, which has its own isolated settlement. The Hoseans do send a representative to the Allied Council on occasion, but their culture is very different from the average Allied territory city, as their isolation and environment have pushed them to advance in different ways. Contrasting these isolationist communities, Praeta is the city of urban scholars, who accept students from all over to share knowledge and understanding. Not that the schools here are charities devoted to the pure ideas of learning, they are sponsored by dozens of megacorps from across the planet and the Pact World, seeking to foster the brightest students to greatness so they can be snapped up by the company and used to gain an edge over their competition. Academic rivalries between students are fierce and often resolve with elaborate magitech duels between technomancers seeking to prove their particular methodology is superior to all others. Now, Triaxus is often seen by outsiders as a planet with pristine natural wilderness with only small pockets of civilization. This isn't entirely true. Industry can be found everywhere and leaves a footprint, but the worst example is Vailiti's Sound, where the water isn't sound. That is, it's not sound, it's very polluted. The nearby city of Zo is a hub of starship pilots, and the constant travel in and out has produced massive amounts of runoff, fouling the water. Drift travel has cut down on this a lot, since it doesn't produce the same pollutants, but this ecological disaster was in full swing for who knows how long before the Gap. Since we're here, let's look at Zo. The port of 1,000 ships has scaled up with space travel, accepting ships from all across the Pact Worlds. Anyone looking for a hotshot pilot is going to find them by the bucket load here, all hanging out in the 87 corner booths each of the bars is required by trope law to have for hotshot pilots to hang out in. And since pilots need ships, the city also hosts hundreds of engineers and mechanics working to advance drift engines and starship technology. Because so many corporations hire pilots from Zo, there's a persistent rumor that the city is also home to a massive spy network who operate in secret and sell corporate information to the highest bidder. The city insists quite loudly that this is not true, which is exactly what they would say if this is 100% true. Oh hey, wait a second, I just remembered. Isn't Zo also the name of that Elybrian Necrovite game show host from Eox? I wonder how he feels about a city that shares his name. Hold on, let me check the infosphere real quick. Okay, it looks like he's actually suing the city for trademark infringement. Oh, no, my mistake. He sued the city for that and won, and in the process won the right to rename it, which he is doing via a system-wide poll. Okay. According to this, the mayor of the city that used to be Zo is pushing to have it be called Greater Zo, which is kind of a dig, but also not a bad compromise, and according to the okay, it's now officially named City McCityface. I love this setting so much. The northern portion of the Allied territories is less occupied since they have to deal with the seasonal encroaching of glaciers. These northern glaciers are known as the Expanse, and it's dotted with small rural hamlets that can easily vanish into nothing if the few people that visit from the outside stop coming. Many of them, like the villages on the large island of Weldfall, eschew most forms of modern tech beyond what's needed to survive. In Weldfall's case, that's giant flamethrowers that push back encroaching glaciers, so the definition of modern technology is a little broad sometimes. But the opposite can be found across the continent on Grenlock, where you can experience balmy summer beaches year-round, never worrying about the encroaching cold of winter. This is done through a powerful magical phenomena called virtual reality gaming. Seriously. The ultra-rich can preserve their bodies in VR pods held securely deep underground, while their minds live out their lives in a luxury paradise untouched by the outside world. Now, since we decided to go up the Allied territories, let's move down the Drakelands. The first place of note isn't a settlement, but a large freshwater lake called the Hawk's Claw. Named for the draconic deity of destruction, ancient legends tell of powerful malevolent dragons spontaneously rising from the lake to rain destruction down upon the land. Maybe it's where Dahak's perpendicularity was? In modern times, the frozen lake is much calmer, but the calm is hiding a dark and dangerous undead presence in a gigantic ice cave far below. On the other side of the continent, Ignomus Bay is the fish-based breadbasket of the Drakelands. Fish basket? Fish basket. Boats of all shapes and sizes ply the waters all across the bay to pull in aquatic life of all kinds. There's very little regulation about who can fish for what here, which I worry could result in long-term issues, but a lot more energy is being devoted to the short-term problem of disappearing boats and unknown aquatic dragons popping up out of the waves. Naturally, the three biggest settlements in the Drakelands are all city-states controlled by dragons. The Caldera Basin holds a large sulfuric lake that boils all year round, no matter the season. The basin is the domain of a powerful cinder dragon, Uzilzilian the Flame Empress. Her realm is uncontested, as most creatures simply can't survive here, but the possibility of warmth and protection during the harsh winter brings a lot of servants. South of the basin is Dreknil, the domain of Drekniliax. Prior to the gap, her territory was expanding in a way that other dragons in the Drakelands found concerning, so they worked together to drive her back into hiding. After the gap, she remained largely in the background, working as the CEO of the Draktek Corporation, which specialized in draconic cybernetic and bioaugmentation. In recent decades, she has emerged as a titan of industry in the Drakelands, by which I mean she has left hiding to reveal a creature that is as much machine as dragon. With polycarbon wings, tactical targeting systems in her eyes, and prosthetic hind legs that have more guns than toes. Needless to say, opposition towards her after this reveal has been muted. Her largest rival is Serozanixia, the dragon who controls the city of Serozanix. She considers herself a conservationist and works with a contingent of xenodruids to preserve the beauty and natural wonder of the Drakelands. Serozanixia is an expert diplomat and maintains strong political ties with the Skyfire Mandate and the surrounding city-states. However, a lot of allies are getting more and more concerned with how little the dragon has actually been seen in recent years. Voice messages and holocalls keep coming out, but an actual physical appearance is long overdue, and there are whispers that only the dragon's mind actually remains. Her body perhaps too infirm to move, or maybe even dead. Such a loss would dramatically shift the balance of power in the Drakelands if it's true. However, all of this is about to be thrown into absolute utter chaos, because recent galactic events have dramatically affected Triaxus. I've hinted at this several times before, but I'm holding the details to the final video because it's heavily tied to that planet. But this event of 324 caused a powerful shockwave to ripple across the system, and when it hit Triaxus, it literally threw the planet. The world was blasted out of its winter orbit and shifted towards the sun, bringing on an immediate change of seasons that no one was prepared for. Unseasonal floods are hitting the coastlands, the large pair of lakes in the Allied territories called the Duet seem to be singing for some reason, and the forces of the Flame Empress are taking the new summer as a sign that it's time to expand as lava flows down the mountain like rain. In short, it's crazy time to be on Triaxus right now. This is the world that is most dramatically changed by the most recent events of the galaxy. The gap brought relative peace to the planet and allowed the people to expand beyond their world and its biological cycles. Now that cycle, which has worked for centuries, has been shattered and no one quite knows how things are going to settle. Perfect kind of place to find some adventure, wouldn't you say? Triaxus brings a lot of separate concepts together into a cohesive whole, and in a way kind of plays the role Galarian would have played if it was allowed to stick around. What if we take a world that was mostly full of traditional fantasy concepts, like dragon riders, extreme seasons, and that sort of thing, and push them forward into the future? What happens to the dragon-ruled cities when it gets modern innovations? The dragons build guns of their own, and the riders and mounts team up as hotshot pilots and expert gunners. Traditions born of circumstance adapt as more and more people are able to push beyond what the world gives us and make things all their own. Triaxus has always been about adapting to the situation you find yourself in, and while the recent events are a big change, they're ready to adapt. Thank you so much for watching this one, Finders, and I hope you enjoyed this look at Triaxus. Sorry if my train of thought wandered a bit, that's just kinda how it is here. Our next planet is going to be hugely different from the previous ones, but that'll be for next time. For now, check out the socials and the Patreon. Thank you so much for watching this video, keep your eyes on the stars, and explore, report, and cooperate.